Hi friends, welcome back to Arc Tutorials. This is React full tutorial series for absolute beginners. We are continuing to learn about the hooks that are used in the functional components, and today we are going to learn about useReducer. useReducer is used for managing complex states in a kind of enterprise applications or little complex applications. It's an alternative to useState where you can also manage the state using useState. So today I'm going to show you multiple use cases of useReducer and show you different variations of it and how you can easily start using useReducer in your functional components. Let's get started. If you have missed out on the first 26 episodes, make sure that you go through them. I'm covering a lot of details as part of the hooks and you don't want to miss them. Alright, so these are the top 20 commonly used React hooks that I'm covering that are absolutely important. So make sure that you go through each one of them in order to learn and master them. Right? Today we are learning about useReducer. Alright, so what is useReducer? useReducer is a React hook that is used for managing state in a more complex or structured manner. It's especially helpful when you have a state that depends on the previous state or when you need to manage state transitions in a more predictable way. Remember a few points about the useReducer. Number one is that it's often used to manage complex state logic. Okay, it takes two arguments. One is the reducer function, the actual function that will execute what needs to be done, and the initial state of it. The reducer function allows and defines how the state should be updated based on a certain action. Okay, so think of it this way, that it's a generic function which takes some input. That input is called actions. Those actions can be anything, and based on a particular action you will write what needs to be updated. Dispatch. The useReducer hook returns a dispatch function. Now this is what is used to send an action to a reducer. Okay, so it's compulsory, it's mandatory to define a dispatch. Predictable updates. Unlike useState, useReducer ensures that updates to the state are more predictable, and that way you control it more in a point that you can have complex logic added into your state transitions. Okay, so this is a high level theory, but let me give you some real-time use cases of where you find useReducer to be useful. It can be used especially for handling the form handling, validations, submission, etc. Shopping carts, like controlling the state of the shopping cart, like adding, removing, updating items, calculating prices, discounts, etc. Authentication is one other very important part where you can use your reducer, especially with useContext. Then when you have a search which is little complex, which has a lot of dynamic params, that's where filtering, sorting, those things can come into picture. You want to track that states and that data, so you can use useReducer. You can use it for pagination, application routing, onboarding flow, surveys, real-time collaboration like chat, visual effects, and much more. Okay, so these are all the real-time use cases. Now let's go ahead and do hands-on and learn all about the variations that we can use useReducer with. So inside hooks, I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it reducer.js. Okay, and the first thing we'll do is obviously import React from React, and since we are working and trying to learn useReducer, we'll import that also. useReducer. Okay, now why? Okay, sorry, my bad in typing. Okay, so we have imported the React and useReducer. Alright, so the next thing we'll do is first, let's go ahead and define a functional kind of a um, say a component, and we'll modify it and make it complex as we go along. We'll start with basic and then we'll keep adding. So this is a simple functional component I'm writing. Now let's define the initial state. So initial state I am saying is this, right, which is an object and has a key called count, and it's 0. That's all we'll do, simple. And then we are going to define const, and let's have the state, and we will have a dispatch event that we will bind, and here we'll use useReducer. Now this will take two things, a reducer function and the initial value. So I'm going to say initial state. Now we need to define the method, which is the reducer function. So let's do that and say reducer equal to, and this will take the state and an action. Okay, those are the two params it takes. Now in this we can write a switch statement and say, let's say if action dot, let's say type, and in this we are going to write our switch statement, and that's where we'll do the all the definitions of it. So we are going to say case, and we'll write if the case, let's say increment, right? And what should it do? It should return a value. What is the value it should return? It should return count, should be state dot count plus 1. That means every time you get a signal which is increment, you will do plus 1, and here you are going to return, and same thing, but now you will do a subtraction, and you are going to say count minus 1. Right? So I have two actions that this reducer will take. One is increment, one is decrement. Simple logic, nothing complex. And we can also write a default if you want, default, and we can say if it's a default, just throw a error. Okay, just simple as that. Now we have the functional component, we have the function to reduce it. Now let's go ahead and add our um, return, which is the actual HTML template that will be rendering. So I'm going to use fragment, which is empty, so that we don't add extra DOM or something. And you can say count, and you can print the initial state dot count and save it. Okay, I'm not going to add anything more. I'm just going to use this and say npm start. Alright, so this has started. Now what we need to do, go to our app.js. Right now it's looking little clumsy, I know. We'll clean it up because right now let's say we will clean it up once we add the routing and all that. Will make it more beautiful, but for now let's continue building on that. Okay, so alright, what I'll do is inside this index.js, oh sorry, let's go to our app.js. Now here what we'll do, we have this structure that we have used. Now we can add that anywhere we want, like say effect or anything that we have used earlier, right? So I'm going to use this and say let's add it here only for now, and here I'm going to include that and say from hooks slash reducer, and here you're going to say counter, because that's what we are bringing in. Okay, so now that you have added, everything is set. The only thing that's pending now is to export default counter. Okay, so now if you go into the app and type, you should see that, but that's never mind. Alright, so it says counter is defined but never used. We'll use it now, and inside the fetch data component I'm going to say counter and close it, and it says imported as counter was not found in reducer. Let's check what is happening, and here let's debug that code. We exported the default as counter, so this is good. Let's check here what's happening. From the hooks we got in the counter, we are adding it. Dispatch counter is not exported. Is the spelling right? counter. Alright, okay, so you don't need this since it's only one. Okay, so now this should be good. Okay, this is good. So now count is 0. You can see here it's coming as count as 0. So now let's go ahead, add some more details to it and add the dispatches. So let's say we have on click, we are going to add a dispatch, and we are going to say what type it's going to be. Okay, so I'm going to say type, and we can pass increment and close this button and say increment, and it says React limits the number of re-renders. So let's see what's happening. Oh, not directly, not directly. So here it's a function, so we will write it here and then do a dispatch. Now see, it keeps on incrementing, because the if you look at this, we are saying every time you get an action as increment, just increment that and return that value, right? Now same thing if you copy and say dispatch, now decrement. So now you can increment and you can decrement, right? So this is just a simple example of useReducer. If you can see again the code, remember whenever you use a useReducer, you will have a state and dispatch, and it takes, this function takes two inputs. One is the reducer function, one is the initial state. Dispatch is the type of action that you're passing, and state is nothing but the value of this particular current one that we are maintaining. Okay, so every time you dispatch, this reducer gets called. Based on the action, it will either increment or decrement it. That's the most simplest thing I can tell you to understand. One of the most useful hooks, I would say, especially with functional components. So make sure that you understand this concept correctly, and based on that your state is easily managed. All right, perfect. So this is good. We'll cover the hooks first, and then we will come back to routing and clean up our application a little bit, but first it's important to understand all the hooks. I hope this is clear. Do let me know if you have any questions or if you face any difficulty. I'll be more than happy to help you. Thank you so much for joining in this episode. We'll continue our learning of hooks. In the next episode, I'll cover useRef. Thank you so much.